This is Hi, and I'm excited to introduce Julio and Sandra for our next session on NetBackup Flex Scale. If there's three things I want you to walk away from this session, there's three words. It's NetBackup, it's scale out, and it's simple. All right, over to you, Julio.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So welcome to the Veritas Scoop. So what is the Veritas Scoop? Well, it's not about ice cream, but if you're interested, I'm a cookies and cream type person. Listen, it's all about understanding what Veritas is up to. And Veritas is up to some pretty cool stuff. And one of those things is called NetBackup Flex Scale, their latest innovation, their latest introduction to the NetBackup family of products. So I've got a lot of questions, right? I had an opportunity to listen to the previous session, but I've got some questions that I want to get answers to. Now, I've asked my good friend, Ms. Sandra Moulton from our TME team to join me. Sandra, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, Julio. Thanks for asking.
Great, great. So Sandra, myself and my audience, we've got a lot of questions. We'd love to see if we can get some answers. Are you willing to help us out here?
Absolutely. Go for it.
Fantastic. Well, why don't we just start with a pretty simple one, right? What is FlexScale from your view? How would you explain it to our audience?
Well, at its essence, it's NetBackup, of course, right? It's just in a different deployment model that was actually architected specifically for scale out. And because it's scale out, we wanted to make sure that we built in a lot of automation to simplify management. And like all of our appliances, it has high availability built into it.
Fantastic. So you said NetBackup. I'd be curious, what version of NetBackup will it be shipping with?
9.0.
Fantastic. Our latest and greatest. Great job there. You know, you also said scale out. You know, I'm very familiar with scale out. Scale out does solve some problems that scale up cannot solve. But at the same time, I've seen some implementations that introduce a level of complexity. Can you tell us a little about FlexScale's implementation of scale out?
Sure. Yes. Simplicity is key, right? So when we were designing that, that was one of our main focuses. So what we've done is we've abstracted the NetBackup layer, making it easy for non-backup admins, like maybe application admins, to be able to do their own backups. We also made sure that deployment is a breeze. It takes less than 5 minutes of your time to actually do a deployment of the system. And then we've automated a lot of the management tasks, things like scaling, things like technology refreshes. And to reduce management overhead, we've also added in self-healing capabilities.
Very cool. I like what you're saying. When I was listening to Harsha and Roger speak before, they mentioned certified partner hardware. And I know traditionally Veritas does purpose-built appliances. So this is kind of a change in direction for Veritas. Could you tell us a little more about this hardware platform that you're moving forward on?
Sure. We're going to be partnering with HPE DL380 Gen 10 systems, and they each come with 32 cores, 192 gigs of RAM. We've got SSDs for the metadata. We've got 112 terabytes of usable capacity per node. And we also have 2 dual 1025 gigabit NICs for your network.
That's awesome. Sounds like a great foundation. But with respect to scaling, what type of scalability is FlexScale going to offer our customers?
So the base configuration is 4 nodes, which comes with 448 terabytes of usable capacity. You can increase capacity by adding individual nodes or nodes in groups up to a maximum of 16 nodes. That'll give you 1.8 petabytes of usable capacity, all in a single domain in a single storage unit. And if you want more capacity, you can add cloud storage with S3 buckets. And this is, as you add the nodes, you're not only increasing capacity, but you're increasing NetBackup itself, as well as performance automatically.
That's awesome. I'm going to come back to that cloud statement you made a little later today. What about, listen, we can talk all day. I'm a big believer in seeing stuff. Are you in a position to kind of show us what it's like to build out a FlexScale cluster?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we look at a system, right? So we're going to log into the CLISH of the one system, and we're going to configure the management port. And then once we've done that, we're going to use that IP address on that single system to log into the UI for FlexScale. And this is going to allow us to log in. You'll see the prerequisites, the common things, names and IP addresses. And then we've broken up the configuration into 5 modules. The first of which is node configuration. So you're going to go in here and you'll see that the 4 nodes are automatically detected. Then you have the option of selecting a YAML file. YAML files are really great because they really simplify the process of doing the installation and reduce the chance of human error. So here we selected a YAML file. If you don't want to use the YAML file, you don't have to. It's just an option. The YAML file, by integrating it, it configured our cluster name here, as well as all of the node names. And you'll see the rest of the configuration is everything from the YAML file. So that's it for node configuration. So now we can move on and we can select network. So now the network is going to be divided into logical categories, starting with data network. You can see all of this is pre-populated again from the YAML file. Now we have management interface, again pre-populated. You have optional IPMI information and custom hosts. And that's it. So our network is configured. Now we're going to configure the cluster. So you do the normal networking information for the cluster, and then some other cluster specific settings, and you can add in your NetBackup licenses. And that's it. That's your everything that you need to configure the cluster. And now we're going to add administrators. So you can add as many administrators as you want, and you can assign them roles of either appliance admin, NetBackup admin, or you can give the same user both roles, whatever you would like. And finally, we finish up with auto support. And that's it. I mean, that's all that you had to provide. So you can see that's less than 5 minutes, right, of your time. The last thing you have to do is click on install configuration. And now it kicks off an automated process that's going to go through configuring the cluster. And you can walk away, go get coffee, or if you want to look at details to see, you know, hey, what's happening while this is going on, you can. So after the cluster configuration completes, it's automatically going to start doing NetBackup configuration. And again, you don't have to watch this if you don't want, but if you want to look at details, you can go ahead, see what's happening. Here we can see it's actually looking at configuring deduplication. All of that's done, then it's going to go in and do auto support. So of course I've sped this up because, you know, we don't want to have time to go get coffee ourselves, but the entire thing, you saw it took us about 5 minutes, well, less than that. It would take you about 5 minutes to do it. And overall, it took an hour and 16 minutes for a 4-node cluster configuration to be done. So now you're able to just go in and log into NetBackup.
And that's the NetBackup that all our customers are used to using. So the learning curve is going to be pretty minimal, which is awesome. So what I heard and what I saw was master server configured, media server configured, dedupe configured, role-based security configured, auto support's done, the cluster's up and running, and I'm running backups at this point in time.
Yeah, I mean, you can see right there, the storage unit is already configured for you. All of NetBackup was done, as you mentioned. So you're just going to discover your assets, create your backup jobs, you're off and running. I mean, it's that simple.
That's fantastic. So we've been talking about a master and media servers, top 2 tiers of the NetBackup architecture. A critical tier that you haven't mentioned is our clients. Is any change to the NetBackup clients with respect to Flex Scale?
Yeah, so I remember I mentioned simplicity being important to us, right? So it's a scale out architecture. So you want to be able to grow it easily without having a lot of management overhead. So we've made the client's bp.conf file, or the configuration file that's associated with it, point to the cluster itself. So it has an alias for the media service, which is a cluster-wide service. So as the cluster grows its media services or any of its NetBackup services, the clients don't have to do anything. It's just automatically always pointing to the same cluster, and the cluster manages the load balancing internally.
Yeah, so switching from a NetBackup deployment to a Flex Scale deployment is pretty easy, it seems like.
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
is great. Okay. How about deduplication? You know, dedupe is a big part of any solution, and we offer some really good dedupe rates. Are we doing the same with Flex Scale?
Absolutely. I mean, this is NetBackup after all, right? So we have all the deduplication that NetBackup has. If I break it down a little bit for you, you know, if you remember the configuration initially, right? You saw at the end when I brought up the NetBackup UI, there was a storage pool that was already created for you. So what that is it's made up of all of the disks from all of the nodes in the cluster, all grouped together into a single pool. And that pool we use, or the cluster itself software uses to distribute the data across the cluster resources automatically. So how dedupe works, of course, it's still the same dedupe as you're used to, right? We can still look to see what was backed up in the previous backups and what data is new, so that we only pull in from the clients new backup data. And then what do we actually write? We still have fingerprint caching. So we're still going to compare what we've written to a volume to make sure that we don't duplicate that.
Well, that's fantastic. That's awesome. So it looks like on-prem, where we're giving customers a nice optimized storage. But a lot of our customers are moving to the cloud today. So as they move to the cloud, are we able to offer them some optimization, both in transport as well as storage?
Yes, of course. Yeah. So just like that storage pool there where it does the deduplication, we support the S3 buckets. And so we're going to be sending optimized backups to the cloud. So basically retaining the deduplication savings both across the network and in the S3 buckets.
Okay. So typically, if I start with a 4-node cluster, I might want to add a node or two. Can you walk me through what does it take to add a node to a Flex Scale cluster?
Yeah, I'm totally excited about this. So thanks for asking. All right, so here I've got a 4-node cluster running, right? So you can see it's 4 nodes. You can see I have NetBackup jobs running automatically. But now we want to add a 5th node, let's say, into our cluster. So we're going to go into the ILO itself, and we're going to power on that new node. So, we've already racked it and we've cabled it up to the network. That's all we've done. Now we power it on. Now these come pre-installed with the NetBackup Flex Scale ISO installed on it. So it's going to boot there automatically. All right, so now that our system is booted up, if we go back to our UI, we can do a scan for new nodes. It's looking on the private network, and so it can automatically detect any new nodes on that private network. You can select that and say add node to cluster. And then it's going to show us the before and after configuration if we add the node. It also gives you the capability of selecting the prioritization of the resources for either foreground, meaning NetBackup backup and restore operations, or background operations, which is the adding in the new node and rebalancing operations. So you get to select what you want. I would say, if you're running it, over a holiday break or an extended long weekend, then you might want to do it for faster reconfiguration, but your choice. Then you're going to go in and you're going to configure in your node name that you want and provide the various network details that are required for each node. So both data, management, and if you want IPMI as well. And then you're going to select to add that to the cluster. And now this is a background process running. You can walk away again. It's a long weekend, go away if you want. Or if you want to look at details, you can see, what process is happening right now. And you can look at that. Meanwhile, if we look at NetBackup jobs, they're running just the same as they were before, so totally uninterrupted. It's going to add the node, and then after it adds the node, you'll see now it's got the 5 nodes showing. Now it's doing a rebalance operation. Now this is critical, right? Because there's a lot of different ways to do a rebalance. We've optimized it. So we're moving the minimum amount of data so that we are balanced across all the nodes in the cluster while we're maintaining resiliency. So that's key, right? You don't want to shift everything around. Some rebalance operations do that, and that's a terrible thing. Notice it finished with configuring NetBackup, and now we're looking at the backup jobs, and we did nothing. We didn't go to the clients. Remember the bp.conf. We didn't have to modify anything there. The cluster itself started new jobs using that new node automatically.
That's fantastic. I really like the idea that backups were running when we started this, and when we were done, the new node started participating in the cluster. That's great. And I'm assuming we could add more than one node at a time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. So let's talk about availability. When we talk about clustering, let's talk about first hardware. What type of availability do we have around the hardware to make sure it stays up and running?
So other than the nodes, of course, having no single point of failure, right? You've got redundant disks, you've got redundant power splice and everything. We're able to sustain loss of multiple disks, container failures, network, or nodes.
How many node or disk failures can you handle?
Sure. So it depends on your cluster size. So let's start with the base config, which is 4 nodes. So in that configuration, we can lose an entire node, which is 14 disks. We can lose the entire node, and we can lose another disk from any other node, and the data remains intact. Now, as you scale the cluster, resilience grows with it. So when we get to 6 nodes, let's say, there I can lose an entire node plus any other 2 disks. So maybe node 2, I lose a disk, node 3, I lose another disk. Or I can actually lose 2 full nodes. That's 24 disks that I can lose right there.
Wow. And I don't think that will ever happen, but that's good to know. So what about the data inside those nodes? The integrity of my backup image is pretty important to me. Are we doing anything to protect the data integrity?
Yeah, so we're protecting that data with erasure coding. Now, we selected erasure coding 8.4 because if you look at the different erasure coding schemes, right? Anything you do is gonna, some people optimize for usable capacity, but then that affects durability. Others optimize for durability, but that affects usable capacity and performance. So it's a really big balancing act to figure out what is best. But because we understand NetBackup and we know that we're writing in large chunks, we understand exactly how we're breaking it up, and we understand the architecture that we're shipping with, 8.4 was our optimal.
So can you give us a little more details about A4 and why do we make that decision versus some other options?
Sure. Yeah. If you look at some of the other common options that you'll see for other scale out deployments, they're using things like 4.2 or 5.2. And, if you look at all of them, if we start with usable capacity, we're right along, the sweet spot, which is 67% usable to raw capacity. Mm-hmm. But then the next two, performance and data durability. So if we looked at performance, so what 8.4 means is that you add up the two. So that's 12 parallel fragments that are being written for every write operation. So that means that I'm distributing the load across 12 different disks within the cluster. So unless you're doing very small IO, which is never good for performance, right? So we know we're doing larger IOs. So by using 12 disks for every write operation, we're making the maximum use of all the resources within the cluster, which is ideal. So something like a 4.2, you're only doing 6 writes. So, even in the smallest configuration, it might be okay. It's not as good as writing 12, but imagine as you scale out a cluster. I mean, we're talking 16 nodes times 12 disks, and you're only writing 6. So that's not ideal. So having more parallel writes is definitely optimal. And then if we look at disk or data durability, you and I both know, I started in support. The biggest thing that always fails is disks. So you want to be as resilient as possible against disk failures. So with 8.4, that means that last number is how many disks can fail. So we can lose any 4 disks at any time and our data is still intact. Whereas with the other configurations, they can only lose 2 disks, and that severely limits you. And, as you said, backup data is important. That's why you're backing it up, right? So you want to make sure that's also protected.
Yeah, no, that's great. Now, I would lose my NetBackup Architect license if I didn't ask you about the catalog. What are we doing around the NetBackup Catalog?
Sure. Yeah, you got to protect that metadata. So we built it in. So if you remember when we did the initial configuration, part of that was protecting the catalog. First, what it does is it takes those volumes and it triple mirrors it. Then it sets up a NetBackup policy that is backing up the data from the catalog onto the erasure coded disk, so onto a separate disk. And this is automatic. It also sets up snapshots. So automatically you're having snapshots running on a schedule of the catalog. And lastly, if you set up DR, it's going to set up replication for you. So that's 4 ways to protect your NetBackup catalog. Do you think that'll do?
A backup of a backup of a backup of a backup? I think you're doing okay. I think you're doing good. You mentioned site recovery, and that's a big interest. So talk to me about Flex Scale. In the event that I do have a site failure, what kind of protection does Flex Scale offer me?
Sure. So what we've actually added is the capability of having a DR within a single NetBackup domain. So you can have your clients writing data to one site, and then if that site goes down, a passive site, so a secondary site can take over operations and automatically have your clients back up and recover from that other site without having to recreate your policies.
Well, that's great. That's fantastic. Now, we've got a lot of NetBackup customers, that have domains out there. So how would an existing customer possibly integrate with FlexScale their existing domains? Excuse me.
Sure. So just like today, you can do NetBackup Air. So you can have a NetBackup Flex Scale domain replicate data to another active domain running in your environment. Yeah.
That's great. Awesome. Fantastic. Let's talk about technology refresh. A very common thing that could happen is you might want to move to a new model hardware. Possibly a node could fail. If this does happen, how does FlexScale deal with that?
So yeah, great question. So this is very much like the add node process. So to me, it's very exciting because it's so easy. All right, so you're gonna install a new node, you're putting it in the rack, powering it up, connecting it up to the network. In the UI, you're gonna discover it, same as we did in the add node video. But here, you're gonna be able to select which node you wanna replace. And there's a simple replace node option. And I keep showing you UI and talking about UI, but everything I've talked about, you can do from API if you prefer. So it's never a problem. So you're gonna select to replace the node. In the background, what that's doing is it's creating the data on the new node in the background. Backup jobs are still happening. And then it's going to, when that's complete, it's going to copy over the configuration and the NetBackup services onto the new node, and then you can get rid of the old one.
Is that, what about the master server? What if that's the node we're replacing?
Yeah, that's always key, right? No, doesn't matter. I mean, this is a containerized architecture. So that gives us the flexibility, not only of easier upgrades and everything, but it allows for us to move services in the event of failures or technology refreshes easily.
So what I just heard was rolling upgrade. Basically, I can basically upgrade my environment without having to stop anything. Fantastic, fantastic. So look, I mean, we could be here forever talking about a lot of this. I got more questions, but let me see if I got this. Let's kind of do a recap and tell me if I picked up some of the key points that you talked about today. So first, regarding that scale out architecture, what I really like is the maturity of NetBackup. NetBackup's been a lot of years. It's a market leader. The fact that you're using 9.0 is great. So good step. Secondly, distributed dedupe. That's awesome. Being able to have that dedupe pool shared across multiple nodes, but every node knows about each other. Love what you did there. And then you got some great scalability. Starting at 4 nodes, going up to 16 with a total capacity of 1.8 petabytes. Fantastic. How am I doing so far?
That's great. And that's 1.8 petabytes in a single domain.
Look at that. That's pretty awesome, right? Simplification. This is pretty important to our customers because nowadays they're doing a lot more with less staff. So they need things easy. Well, I think you've done that with the automatic configuration of NetBackup services, the master server, the media server, auto support, right? The NetBackup Catalog you mentioned, right? All of that's done for you. So thank you for that. I think that's a great step in the right direction. Containerization. We introduced containerization in Flex Appliance, and people love it. I like the idea that we move this over into FlexScale because it gives you a lot of agility and a lot of flexibility with different roles within your backup infrastructure. And lastly, cloud. You mentioned that we can move data into the cloud in an optimized fashion and can be stored in an optimized fashion, kind of like what NetBackup is. And this is NetBackup at the end of the day, right? Yeah. So it's kind of cloud ready. And lastly, let's jumping into high availability. My takeaways: rolling upgrade, love it. Secondly, optimizing performance and availability with that 8/4 erasure coding. I really like the idea that you put some real big thought in that, and you didn't just do a me too. You did something that our customers need. And last but not least, my favorite, the NetBackup Catalog. You really did a good job of protecting that. So all in all, I think you guys did great. Did I kind of recap that pretty well?
Yeah, you did a great job.
Well, listen, this has been fantastic. I want to thank you for your time. But I think we got some people that want to ask questions live. You game?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Let's go for it. And thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Well, that was a great deep dive, and it actually answered a number of the questions we had in the chat regarding node size, capacity, vendor that we're using, and things like that. So I'll just pick out a few questions that may not have been answered during the presentation. The first one I'll cover, are you using erasure coding for the storage pool spanned across all nodes? Sandra, you want to take that one?
Sure, yeah. So we are using erasure coding 8.4, and that's using all of the disks across all of the nodes in the cluster. So yes.
Okay. And she did cover a little bit about the resiliency and high availability. And we talked about, the starting point is a 4-node cluster is the minimum starting point. So what happens in that configuration if you lose 2 of the 4 nodes?
Sure. So it's with the erasure coding 8.4 and how we have the catalog protected, we're actually protected in a 4 or 5 node configuration against the loss of a full node plus any additional disk from a second node. And if you lose that, everything continues as normal. If you lose anything beyond that, NetBackup operations will stop until such a time as you can bring it back into compliance, so into a node plus a disk. However, as we scale the cluster, so when we get to 6 nodes or beyond, you'll see that we are able to support the loss of 2 full nodes, and operations will continue and your data remains resilient. So resiliency increases as you scale your cluster.
Great. Now, with NetBackup customers, the master server is always an area of concern. So how does Flex Scale, scaling from a master server perspective, how do we provide that HA so that jobs can run 24/7?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's always critical for customers. So we've containerized all of the services. So NetBackup itself is running it within containers inside of the cluster, which is managed. And if, let's say, a node went down that was running a master service, the cluster the cluster management software itself actually takes care of restarting that application or that container on another node. So your jobs would continue. So the jobs that were actively running at the point when the node failed would need to be restarted, but all your policies and everything else would continue as normal.
We also have a couple of questions on fiber channel support, so I thought we'd just address that in this question, in this Q&A here. Is fiber channel as an IO option supported on Flex Scale?
So fiber channel is supported on many deployment options within NetBackup, including Flex Appliance and NetBackup Appliance. However, at this time, we do not support that on Flex Scale. But if you needed to, you could go ahead and you could in your environment, it's not like you just have to run Flex Scale. So you could have another domain running on another appliance model and do back up your fiber channel stuff that way.
Then we had a question that wanted to validate that when you're adding nodes to this cluster, you don't have to go touch the clients and update the clients. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a key one, right? Because it's a scale-up architecture, scale-out architecture. So as you scale, you don't want to have to mess with your policies or your clients. So when you add nodes, additional containers are spun up, and your NetBackup services are increased with each node addition. But there is no changes that you have to make other than just add the node, as I showed you in the demo of adding the node to the cluster, and then all of your resources are increased, and your jobs will just automatically start being directed there using the intelligent load balancing that's built into the Flex Scale cluster.
Okay. So we're coming up to our time here, and I just want to to kind of wrap it up a little bit here. Thank you to the attendees who were active on our Q&A. Any last words, Sandra, in terms of what you want customers to take away with and on the Flex Scale solution?
I mean, it's NetBackup. That is my key thing, right? If you love NetBackup, if you want to be able to protect against 800 plus different data sources, if you want the most trusted and most deployed backup solution out there, that's NetBackup. And Flex Scale is another deployment option that gives you the capabilities to run a single data management platform across your entire enterprise, whether it's running in a remote data center by using maybe the Flex Appliance, or whether it's in your central data center and you want to have a containerized solution that scales as you need. Flex Scale is another deployment option for NetBackup.
At the end of the day, we offer customers a choice. So it's really important we do proper discovery, understand the requirements, and then solve the problem you want to solve versus just trying to sell you the product that we have to sell.
Great. And one final thing, where would they find more information, Sandra, on FlexScale if they wanted additional information? You've piqued their interest with the deep dive and they want to get more information. Where would they go?
Sure. So on Veritas.com, there is a product support page for NetBackup Flex Scale. I'll be on, as well as Julio, all day. So we'll be able to answer any of your questions. If you want to have one-on-one conversations with us, reach out to your Veritas reps, and I'm happy to have them schedule meetings. We can do one-on-ones anytime you want. And we published a bunch of collateral today. So you'll see there's a white paper that I published today. I think 5 different videos. I'm going to have a series of blogs that I'll be putting out weekly. So a lot of good information out there.
Great. Thank you so much, Julio and Sandra. And that wraps up our session for the day.
Thanks, Hi.
Take
Thanks,
care.
everybody.